The year was 1878, and Ethan Carter had been alone in these mountains for 6 winters. That was how he counted time now, not by months or seasons, but by the number of times snow had buried his cabin and he'd survived it. He was 31 years old, but the mirror over his wash basin told a different story. The face staring back looked older, harder, like the mountain itself had carved lines into his skin. His hands were scarred from axe work and frostbite. His voice had grown rough from disuse. Some days he'd go a week without speaking a single word out loud. There was no one to talk to except the wind, and the wind never answered back. That morning started like any other. He woke before dawn, stirred the coals in the fireplace, and set water to boil for coffee. The cabin was small, just one room with a loft for sleeping, but it was solid. He'd built it himself when he first came up here, running from a world that had taken everything soft from him. A woman named May had promised him forever, then married the sheriff's son instead. Ethan left town the day after their wedding, rode up into the mountains, and never looked back. Up here, there were no promises, no heartbreak, just silence and survival, and that was enough. Or at least, that's what he told himself every morning when he woke up alone. The knock came just after sunrise. It was so soft at first that Ethan thought he'd imagined it. He froze with his coffee cup halfway to his lips, listening. Nothing. Then it came again, weaker this time, like someone barely had the strength to raise their hand. Ethan set down his cup slowly. Nobody came up this high in winter. The trail was dangerous, and most folks in Pine Hollow thought he was half crazy anyway. Mountain Man, they called him, the ghost above the tree line. He grabbed his rifle from beside the door, more out of habit than fear, and pulled it open. The cold hit him first, a wall of white wind that stole his breath. Then he saw her. A woman stood on his porch, swaying like she might fall any second. She was thin, too thin, and her dress was torn and soaked dark with melted snow. Her face was raw from frostbite, her lips cracked and bleeding. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were hollow, empty of everything except desperation. In her arms, she clutched a bundle wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew what that bundle was before she even spoke. Behind the woman, barely visible through the snow, stood a little girl, maybe 4 years old, wrapped in a blanket too small for her tiny body. The child's face was pale as death, her eyes wide and unblinking. She didn't make a sound, just stood there, swaying on her feet like she might collapse at any moment. The woman's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please," she said, and the word cracked like ice breaking. "Please, sir, bear my child." She looked down at the bundle in her arms, then back up at Ethan. Tears had frozen on her cheeks. "I can't leave her for the wolves. I can't. Just give her a decent grave, and then we'll go. I swear we'll leave you be." Ethan stared at her. His mind went blank. 6 years he'd been alone up here, and in all that time, not a single person had knocked on his door. Now this, a dying woman and a dead child. He wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at him to close the door, go back to his coffee, pretend this never happened. He'd learned the hard way that caring about people only brought pain. That's why he came up here in the first place. To stop caring. To stop hurting. But then the little girl behind the woman stumbled. Her legs gave out, and she started to fall. Ethan moved without thinking, catching her before she hit the snow. The child was light as a bird in his arms, her skin ice cold through the thin blanket. She looked up at him with eyes too big for her small face and whispered, "Mama." It was the saddest sound Ethan had ever heard. He looked back at the woman. She was watching him with that hollow stare, waiting for him to turn them away, waiting for the world to be cruel one more time. Ethan shifted the little girl in his arms and looked down at the bundle the woman was holding. Something made him reach out. Maybe it was the memory of his own baby sister who died of fever when he was young. Maybe it was just that he couldn't watch another child die without at least trying. He pulled back the edge of the blanket. A tiny face stared back at him. Another little girl, identical to the one in his arms. Twins. The child's lips were blue, her skin pale as snow. Ethan pressed his rough fingers against her neck, feeling for a pulse. Nothing. He waited, holding his breath. Then, so faint he almost missed it, he felt it. A flutter. Weak and slow, but there. This child wasn't dead. Not yet. Ethan looked up at the woman. "She's not dead yet," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "And neither are you." He stepped back from the doorway and gestured inside. "Get in here. Now." The woman blinked at him like she didn't understand. Like the idea of kindness was so foreign she couldn't recognize it. I don't have money," she stammered. "I can't pay you. I didn't ask for money." Ethan cut her off. "I said get inside before you all freeze to death on my porch." He turned and walked into the cabin, still carrying the little girl. Behind him, he heard the woman's footsteps, slow and uncertain, following him into the warmth. Inside, Ethan laid the little girl he was carrying on the floor near the fire, then took the bundle from the woman's arms. The sick child was burning hot despite her cold skin, her body fighting a fever that was trying to kill her. He'd seen this before. Mountain fever, some called it. Lung sickness, others said. Whatever it was, it killed fast if you didn't know how to fight it. And Ethan knew. He'd learned frontier medicine from an old trapper years ago, back when he still thought he might have a future that included other people. "Sit," he ordered the woman, pointing to a chair. She collapsed into it like her legs had finally given up. Ethan moved fast, pulling jars and bundles from the shelves on his wall. Willow bark for fever, pine needle tea for breathing, yarrow to fight infection. He set water to boil and started mixing remedies with the practiced hands of someone who'd done this before. The woman watched him in silence, too exhausted to speak. The healthy twin had crawled close to her mother and was staring at her sister with frightened eyes. Ethan worked through the morning, forcing medicine between the sick child's lips, wrapping her in warm blankets, keeping the fire high. The woman fell asleep in the chair, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. The healthy little girl curled up beside her, but her eyes never left Ethan. Hours passed. The sick child's fever raged, her tiny body shaking with chills one moment and burning the next. Ethan sat beside her through all of it, checking her breathing, adjusting the blankets, forcing more medicine down her throat when she could swallow. He didn't know why he was doing this. Didn't know why he cared. 6 years ago, he'd promised himself he'd never care about anyone again. But here he was, fighting to save a child he didn't even know. As the sun started to set, the woman woke up. She looked around the cabin, confused for a moment. Then her eyes found her sick daughter. "Is she?" She couldn't finish the question. Still fighting, Ethan said quietly, "Fever's high, but she's strong. Got a chance if she makes it through the night." The woman's face crumpled, and she started to cry. Not loud, just quiet tears that ran down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought she was already gone. I thought I'd lost her." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He just went back to tending the fire and checking on the child. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains and snow piled against the cabin walls. Inside, for people who'd been strangers that morning sat together in the firelight. None of them knew it yet, but everything had just changed. The knock on that door had opened something that couldn't be closed again. But to understand how a mother ends up in the mountains begging a stranger to bury her child, you have to go back. Back 3 weeks, to the day when Lena Brooks' world fell apart. Back to the moment when her husband died and left her with nothing but 2 little girls and a devil named Jed Harmon who thought he owned them all. 3 weeks earlier, Lena Brooks woke up to the sound of her husband vomiting in the yard. It wasn't unusual. Eli had been drinking since the day before, celebrating something he wouldn't explain, spending money they didn't have on whiskey at the saloon. She lay in bed listening to him retch and curse, and she felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even disgust anymore. Just emptiness. That's what 5 years of marriage to Eli Brooks had done to her. It had hollowed her out until there was nothing left but the need to protect her daughters. Ava and Rose were still asleep in the small bed they shared across the room. 4 years old, identical in every way except their spirits. Ava was bold, always asking questions, always pushing boundaries. Rose was gentle, quiet, the kind of child who cried when she saw a bird with a broken wing. Lena loved them with a fierceness that scared her sometimes. They were the only good things that had come from her marriage, the only reason she hadn't run away years ago. Pine Hollow was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did. It sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, with one main street lined with wooden buildings that had seen better days. The general store, the saloon, the church, the doctor's office. That was it. Everyone else lived on small farms or worked in a lumber mill on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was all Lena had ever known. She'd been born here, married here, and probably would die here. That's just how life worked in places like Pine Hollow. That morning, Eli stumbled back into the house around noon, still drunk, his eyes red and mean. "Get me food," he slurred, collapsing into a chair. Lena made him eggs and bread, setting the plate in front of him without a word. He ate like an animal, grease running down his chin. The girls watched from their bed, silent and still. They'd learned early not to make noise when Papa was like this. "Got business in town," Eli announced when he finished eating. "Taking the wagon." He stood up too fast and had to grab the table to steady himself. Lena said nothing. She'd stopped arguing with him years ago. Arguing only made things worse. He left without another word, climbing onto their old wagon and snapping the reins. The horse pulled forward slowly, and Lena watched from the window as they disappeared down the dirt road toward town. 2 hours later, Sheriff Morrison knocked on her door. His face told her everything before he opened his mouth. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, taking off his hat. "I'm sorry. There's been an accident." Eli had been driving the wagon back from town when he passed out drunk. The wagon had tipped on a turn, and the wheel had rolled right over him. By the time someone found him, he was already gone. The sheriff said it was quick, said he probably didn't feel much pain. Lena nodded and thanked him for coming. And when he left, she sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. She didn't cry. She just sat there, thinking about what came next. The first visitor arrived before sunset. Mr. Patterson from the general store, where Eli owed $63 for supplies. "I'm real sorry for your loss, Mrs. Brooks," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "But business is business. I'll need payment on that account within the week." After him came Mr. Chun from the feed store. $28. Then Mrs. Riley, who'd sold them furniture on credit. $45. By the time the last one left, Lena knew the truth. She didn't have a single dollar to her name, and she owed more than she could ever pay. The second day after Eli's death, Jed Harmon came. He was Eli's cousin, a man 10 years younger than Eli, but twice as mean. He'd always looked at Lena in a way that made her skin crawl, like she was something he wanted to own. He walked into her house without knocking, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Heard about Eli," he said, not bothering with condolences. "Shame, but that means his debt's passed to family." To me. Lena stood up from the table where she'd been trying to stretch 3 potatoes into dinner for 3 people. "What are you talking about?" Jed smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Eli owed me money. $200. Borrowed it last year for that land deal that fell through. Now he's dead, and someone's got to pay." He looked around the small house, at the girls playing quietly in the corner. "Of course, you ain't got $200, so we'll have to work out another arrangement." "I don't have anything," Lena said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "You could take the house, the furniture, whatever you want. But that's all there is." "Oh, I don't want the house," Jed said, stepping closer. "House ain't worth nothing. But you are. You and those girls. Way I see it, Eli's debts make you my responsibility now. My property by law." He reached out and touched her arm. Lena jerked away like she'd been burned. "I'm not your property. I'm not anyone's property." Jed's smile disappeared. "That's where you're wrong, darling. Frontier law says a widow with debts becomes the responsibility of her husband's next of kin. That's me. You got two choices. Come willingly and be my woman, or I'll take you to the judge and make it legal. Either way, you're mine. Lena felt her world shrinking around her. She looked at her daughters, still playing, unaware of what was being decided. Get out, she whispered. I'll be back in 3 days, Jed said, heading for the door. You think about it. Think about those girls and what happens to them if you say no. Orphanage ain't no place for little ones. He left, and Lena collapsed into the chair, her whole body shaking. That night, Rose started coughing. Just a little at first, but by morning it was worse. Her forehead was hot to the touch, and her breathing sounded wrong, wheezy and wet. Lena wrapped her in blankets and tried to bring the fever down with cool cloths, but it kept climbing. By the second day, Rose was barely conscious, her little body burning up from the inside. Lena carried her to Dr. Whitmore's office in town. The doctor examined Rose for maybe 2 minutes before shaking his head. Lung fever, he said. Bad case. She needs medicine, needs to be kept warm and given fluids. I can help her, but it'll cost $20. I don't have $20, Lena said, her voice breaking. Please, she's dying. I'll pay you back, I swear. Dr. Whitmore's face hardened. I got bills to pay same as everyone. No money, no treatment. I'm sorry. He wasn't sorry. He was just tired of poor people expecting charity. Lena carried Rose back home, tears streaming down her face. Ava walked beside them, holding onto her mother's skirt, too scared to cry. That night, Rose got worse. She started having convulsions, her little body seizing while Lena held her and prayed to a God she wasn't sure was listening. The next morning, Jed showed up again. He stood in the doorway, looking at Rose shaking in her mother's arms. That one's sick, he observed. Needs a doctor. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I could pay for the doctor, could get her the medicine she needs. All you got to do is say yes. Lena looked up at him, saw the calculation in his eyes. He didn't care about Rose. He just saw an opportunity. Get out, she said again, but this time her voice was weak. Think about it, Jed said. You got until tomorrow. Then I'm coming back with the sheriff and papers, and you won't have a choice anymore. He left, and Lena knew he meant it. That night, while Rose burned with fever and Ava slept fitfully beside her sister, Lena made a decision. There was a story in town, an old rumor about a man who lived up in the mountains. A hermit who knew medicine, who'd helped people before he disappeared up there 6 years ago. Most folks said it was just a legend, that the mountain man probably didn't even exist. But Lena had nothing else. No money, no options, no hope. At midnight, she wrapped Rose in every blanket they owned and picked her up. The child was so hot, she felt like holding fire. Ava woke up, frightened. Where are we going, Mama? We're taking a trip, sweet girl. Up the mountain. There's a man there who might help your sister. What about Papa's funeral? Ava asked. They'd buried Eli that afternoon in a pine box donated by the church. Papa's gone, baby. It's just us now. Lena took one last look at the house she'd lived in for 5 years. It had never been a home, not really, just a place where she'd survived. She took Ava's hand, adjusted Rose in her arms, and walked out into the night. She didn't know the mountain was 36 hours away through rough terrain. She didn't know a storm was coming. She didn't know that by the time she reached that cabin, Rose would stop breathing. All she knew was that staying meant losing everything. So she walked into the darkness, carrying one daughter and leading another, choosing the unknown over the certain hell that waited for them in Pine Hollow. Behind her, the town slept. Ahead, the mountains waited. And somewhere up there, in a cabin buried in snow, a man named Ethan Carter was about to have his whole world changed by a knock on his door. The journey up the mountain nearly killed them all. Lena walked through the first night with Rose burning in her arms and Ava stumbling beside her. The child was so tired she could barely stand, but she never complained. Just kept putting one small foot in front of the other, trusting her mother knew where they were going. Lena wasn't sure she did. By dawn, they were lost. The trail markers she'd been following disappeared under fresh snow. The wind picked up, turning the world white and blind. Lena kept walking anyway, because stopping meant freezing to death. Rose hadn't opened her eyes in hours. Her breathing was so shallow that Lena had to keep checking to make sure she was still alive. Every time she found a pulse, weak and fluttering, she thanked God and kept moving. They found shelter in a cave around midday, just a shallow indent in the rock, but it blocked the wind. Lena held both girls close, sharing what little warmth their bodies had left. Ava was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Rose was completely still. "Mama," Ava whispered, "is Rosie going to die?" Lena couldn't answer. She just held them tighter and prayed for a miracle she didn't believe in anymore. They stayed in that cave for hours until the storm calmed enough to see. Then Lena stood up, lifted Rose's limp body, and started walking again. She didn't know which direction anymore. She just walked. The sun was setting on the second day when she saw it. Smoke, thin and gray, rising through the trees ahead. A cabin. Someone was there. Lena felt hope bloom in her chest for the first time in weeks, fragile and desperate. She walked faster, half dragging Ava, her arms screaming from carrying Rose for so long. The cabin grew closer. Solid. Real. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth. Warmth meant life. She reached the door and raised her hand to knock. That's when she realized Rose wasn't breathing anymore. The child's chest was still, her lips blue. Lena's world stopped. She'd been too late. All this walking, all this hoping, and she'd been too late anyway. The grief hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. But she couldn't leave Rose for the wolves. Couldn't just lay her down in the snow and walk away. So she knocked on that door, weak and desperate, and waited. When it opened, she looked up at the stranger standing there and said the only word she could manage. "Please, bear my child." Ethan Carter stared at her with hard eyes, and for a moment, Lena thought he'd say no, thought he'd close the door and leave them there in the cold. But then Ava collapsed, and he caught her. He held the little girl for just a second before looking back at Lena, and something in his face changed. He reached for the bundle in her arms. "May I?" His voice was rough and used as speaking. Lena nodded, too exhausted to do anything else. He pulled back the blanket and pressed his fingers against Rose's neck. Waited. Lena watched his face, saw the concentration, the focus. Then his eyes met hers. "She's not dead yet," he said, "and neither are you. Get inside." Everything after that was a blur. Ethan carried Rose inside, laid her by the fire, started barking orders. "Boil water. Get blankets. Hold her head up." Lena moved like a ghost, doing what he said without thinking. Ava sat by the fire, watching everything with wide, frightened eyes. Ethan worked over Rose with sure hands, forcing medicine between her lips, wrapping her in warmth, checking her pulse every few minutes. Hours passed. Lena didn't remember sitting down, but suddenly she was in a chair and her eyes were closing. She tried to fight it, tried to stay awake to watch over her daughters, but her body had nothing left to give. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Ethan sitting beside Rose, his hand on the child's forehead, his face determined. Then exhaustion won, and Lena fell into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to morning light streaming through a window and the sound of a child laughing. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then all came rushing back. The mountain, the stranger, Rose dying. She sat up fast, her heart pounding, and looked around the cabin. Ava was sitting by the fire, eating something from a tin bowl. And beside her, wrapped in blankets and looking pale but alive, was Rose. Her eyes were open. She was breathing. She was alive. Lena started crying, deep sobs that shook her whole body. Ethan stood by the stove, watching her with those hard eyes that maybe weren't quite so hard anymore. "Fever broke an hour ago," he said quietly. "She'll need rest, but she'll live." Lena wanted to thank him, wanted to find words big enough for what he'd done, but nothing seemed adequate. He'd given her back her daughter. He'd given her back her life. All she could manage was a whispered, "Thank you." Ethan just nodded and turned back to the stove. "You all need food," he said. "Then rest. Storm's not done yet. You're staying here until it passes." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Lena felt something like safety. They were still in danger. Jed would come looking eventually. The world outside was still cruel and cold. But in this moment, in this cabin, with this strange man who'd saved her daughter's life, Lena felt like maybe they had a chance. Maybe God had been listening after all. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains. Inside, the fire crackled warm. And 3 people who'd been strangers yesterday started becoming something else. Something that might, if given time, become family. 3 days passed in quiet routine. Rose grew stronger each day, her color returning, her appetite coming back. Ava followed Ethan around the cabin like a shadow, asking questions he mostly answered with nods or single words. Lena worked without being asked, cleaning, cooking with the little they had, trying to earn their keep. Ethan watched them all with careful eyes, saying nothing about them staying, but not asking them to leave either. On the 4th morning, Ethan pulled out a piece of wood and a knife. Ava immediately appeared at his elbow. "What are you making?" she asked. "Bird," Ethan said simply and started carving. Ava watched in fascination as the wood took shape. By evening, a small wooden bird sat on the windowsill. The next day, he made another, then a third. 3 birds for 3 people. Ava counted them, her small finger pointing at each one. "That's Mama. That's me. That's Rosie." She looked up at Ethan with serious eyes. "Where's yours?" Ethan stopped mid-carve. He stared at the birds for a long moment. "Haven't figured out if I belong yet," he said finally. Lena, sitting by the fire mending a tear in Ava's dress, looked up. Their eyes met across the cabin, and something passed between them. An understanding. A question neither was ready to ask out loud. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Ethan and Lena sat by the fire in comfortable silence. Finally, Lena spoke. "Why do you live up here alone?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames like they might give him the words. "Had a life down in Pine Hollow once," he said eventually. "Woman I loved. Thought she loved me back. She married someone else. Someone richer, more respectable. I couldn't stay and watch that, so I came up here. Sometimes being alone is easier than being hurt," Lena said softly. "Easier," Ethan agreed. "But it ain't better." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You made me remember that." Before Lena could respond, they heard it. A sound that made her blood freeze. Horse hooves, slow and deliberate, coming up the mountain trail. She knew that sound, knew it in her bones. "It's him," she whispered, her face going pale. "Jed." Ethan stood immediately, moving to the window. Through the trees, a rider emerged. Even at a distance, there was something threatening in the way he sat his horse. "Stay inside," Ethan said, reaching for his rifle. "Keep the girls quiet." Lena gathered Ava and Rose, pulling them behind the stove where they'd be out of sight. Ava looked terrified, Rose confused. "It's okay," Lena whispered, but her shaking hands told a different story. The knock that came was nothing like the desperate plea Lena had made days ago. This was demanding, entitled. Ethan opened the door before the second knock could fall. Jed Harmon sat on his horse, looking down at Ethan with cold eyes and a colder smile. "Morning," Jed said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Heard you got something of mine up here. Widow and 2 little girls. Been looking for them." "They're not yours," Ethan said flatly. Jed's smile widened. "That's where you're wrong, mountain man. Lena Brooks owes her dead husband's debts, and those debts pass to me. Frontier law says she's my responsibility, my property, and property that runs away needs to be returned. She's not property. She's a person, and she's staying here." Jed leaned forward in his saddle. "You know who I am? I'm Jed Harmon. I own half the businesses in Pine Hollow. Got the sheriff in my pocket and the judge on my payroll. You're nobody, just some hermit hiding in the mountains. You really think you can stand against me?" Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle, but his voice stayed calm. I think you should turn around and ride back down. This is my land. They're under my protection. That's all that matters. For a moment, Jed just stared at him. Then he laughed, sharp and mean. Your protection? You don't even know her, and you're willing to die for her? She must be something special in bed. Ethan took a step forward, his whole body tense. Say another word like that, and it'll be your last. Jed's smile disappeared. You're making a mistake. I'll be back, and next time I won't be alone. I'll have papers from the judge and men with guns. You can't stop what's coming. He yanked his horse's reins and turned. 3 days, mountain man. You got 3 days to center down, or I'm coming up. And when I do, I won't be asking nice. He rode off, disappearing into the trees. Ethan stood in the doorway long after he was gone, his jaw tight. Finally, he came back inside and closed the door. Lena was standing now, her face white, her hands shaking. He'll come back, she said. He always does what he says. I should leave. I should take the girls and go before he hurts you. Where would you go? Ethan asked quietly. Back to town where he'll take you anyway? Out into the mountains to freeze. He shook his head. No, you're staying. All of you. You can't fight him. You heard what he said. He'll bring men. Ethan looked at her, and his eyes were hard but not cold. I've been alone in these mountains for 6 years because I was afraid to care about anything. Afraid to lose again. But you 3 walked through that door, and everything changed. I'm not sending you back to that man. I don't care what papers he has or how many men he brings. Why? Lena whispered. Why would you risk everything for us? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said simply, because for the first time in 6 years, I got something worth fighting for. That night, while the girls slept and Lena kept watch, Ethan checked his ammunition and sharpened his knife. 3 days. That's all they had before the storm came. But this time, he wouldn't be facing it alone. They came at midnight on the 3rd day, just like Jed promised. Ethan heard them before he saw them. 5 horses, moving slow and deliberate up the mountain trail. He'd been expecting it, preparing for it. The cabin was ready. Extra wood barricading the door. Rifle loaded. Pistol on his belt. Lena had the second rifle, positioned at the window. She wasn't a great shot, but she was good enough. The girls were hidden behind the iron stove, wrapped in blankets, Ava holding Rose tight. Stay down no matter what, Lena had told them. Don't come out until Mama says. Both girls nodded, their eyes wide with fear, but trusting their mother completely. The horses stopped outside. Ethan could see torches through the window, 5 flames burning in the darkness. Jed's voice cut through the night, loud and mocking. Carter, send out the woman and kids, and we ride away peaceful. Keep them, and we burn you out. Your choice. Ethan didn't answer. Words wouldn't change anything now. He just watched through the crack in the shutters, counting men, looking for weaknesses. Jed was in front, confident and drunk on power. For others behind him, hired guns probably. Men who'd do anything for money. Bad odds, but Ethan had the advantage of cover and high ground. Last chance, Carter. Jed shouted. We ain't got all night. Still Ethan said nothing. The silence stretched, and he could feel Jed's anger building. Good. Angry men made mistakes. Finally, Jed cursed and raised his hand. Burn it, he ordered. 2 men dismounted, moving toward the cabin with their torches raised. Ethan aimed carefully and fired. The shot cracked through the night, and 1 torch went flying as the man holding it screamed and grabbed his shoulder. The other man dropped his torch in panic and ran back to his horse. Ethan had aimed to wound, not kill. Not yet. This was still a warning. You just made this personal. Jed roared. He pulled his gun and fired 3 shots at the cabin. The bullets punched through the wooden walls, too high to hit anyone, but close enough to make Ava whimper behind the stove. Lena returned fire through the window, and another man cursed as her bullet grazed his leg. The fight had started, and there was no going back now. For the next hour, it was chaos. Shots fired back and forth. Men trying to rush the door only to be driven back by Ethan's accurate shooting. Jed screaming orders, getting more frustrated with each failed attempt. Ethan kept his head, stayed calm, made every shot count. He'd learned to shoot during the war years ago, back when he was young and stupid enough to think fighting for something meant it wouldn't be taken away. Then Jed changed tactics. Instead of trying to break in, he started targeting the cabin itself. "Light the roof," he ordered. One man climbed onto his horse and threw a torch up high. It landed on the snow-covered roof and rolled off, but the message was clear. They'd burn them out if they couldn't break in. Ethan made a decision. He couldn't just sit here defending forever. Sooner or later, they'd find a way in or burn them alive. He had to take the fight outside, had to end this before someone got killed. He looked at Lena. "I'm going out the back. You keep shooting out this window. Make them think I'm still inside. Don't stop no matter what you hear." Ethan, Lena started, but he was already moving. He slipped out the back window into the snow, circling around in the darkness. The men were all focused on the front of the cabin, shouting and firing. They never saw him coming. Ethan hit the first man from behind, knocking him cold with the butt of his rifle. The second one turned just in time to catch Ethan's fist across his jaw. He went down hard. The third one got a shot off, but Ethan was already moving and the bullet went wide. They crashed together into the snow, rolling and fighting. The man got a knife out, slashing wildly. Ethan felt the blade cut across his shoulder, hot and sharp, but he ignored the pain. He twisted the man's wrist until the knife dropped, then knocked him unconscious with a solid punch. That left Jed and one other man. They finally realized what was happening, that Ethan was outside with them. Jed spun his horse around, his gun coming up. "You should have stayed inside, hermit." Ethan dove as Jed fired, the bullet kicking up snow where he'd been standing. He came up with his own pistol drawn and fired once. Jed's horse reared, spooked by the shot that passed so close to its ear. Jed fell hard, landing in the snow with a grunt. His gun went flying. The last man, seeing his boss down and 3 others unconscious, made the smart choice. He turned his horse and rode hard down the mountain, disappearing into the darkness. Ethan let him go. He walked over to where Jed was struggling to get up, his shoulder dislocated from the fall. "It's over," Ethan said quietly, his gun pointed at Jed's chest. "You lost." Jed glared up at him, his face twisted with rage and pain. "You think this is over? I'll get the law. I'll get more men. You can't protect her forever." Ethan crouched down, his voice low and deadly serious. "Listen close, because I'm only saying this once. You come near her or those girls again, and I won't aim to wound. I'll put you in the ground. Law won't help you if you're dead. Now get on your horse and ride." For a long moment, Jed just stared at him. Then something in Ethan's eyes must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. Ethan helped him onto his horse, watched as he gathered his unconscious men and started down the mountain. When they were gone, Ethan stood there in the snow, bleeding from his shoulder, his whole body shaking from adrenaline. The cabin door opened. Lena ran out, her face pale in the moonlight. "You're hurt," she said, seeing the blood on his shirt. "I'm alive," Ethan said. "We all are. That's what matters." She threw her arms around him, and he held her close, feeling her shake with relief and fear and something else he couldn't name. Inside the cabin, Ava and Rose were crying, calling for their mother. But out here in the snow, under the stars, Lena and Ethan stood together. And for the first time, Ethan understood what he'd been missing all those years alone. This was what made life worth living. Ethan woke up 3 days later to find Lena asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand holding his. The knife wound in his shoulder had gotten infected, bringing fever and delirium. He remembered fragments. Lena's voice, soft and steady, telling him to hold on. Ava bringing cool water. Rose singing a song their mother had taught them. Now, in the gray morning light, he saw them all sleeping around him. Ava and Rose curled up together near the stove. Lena in the chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, dark circles under her eyes. She'd stayed with him the whole time, just like he'd stayed with Rose that first night. The thought made something warm bloom in his chest, something he thought had died years ago. Lena's eyes opened, and when she saw him awake, really awake, tears filled them. "Thank God," she whispered. The fever was so high, I thought. "I'm okay," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Takes more than a knife wound to kill me." She laughed, but it came out as a sob. "Don't ever do that again. Don't ever go out there alone like that. Had to protect you," Ethan said simply. "Had to protect all of you." Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan healed slowly. Lena changed his bandages, made him drink bitter medicine tea, scolded him when he tried to get up too soon. The roles had reversed completely. Now she was taking care of him, and he had to accept it. Had to let himself be vulnerable, let himself need someone. It was harder than fighting Jed had been. Ava and Rose adapted to cabin life like they'd always lived there. They helped with small chores, played with the wooden birds on the windowsill, and started calling Ethan by name instead of sir. One afternoon, Ava climbed onto his bed while he was resting. "Mr. Ethan," she said seriously, "are you going to be our papa now?" Ethan's breath caught. He looked at Lena, who was pretending not to listen while she cooked. That's not for me to decide, little one. But you saved us," Ava insisted. "You fight the bad men. You make Mama smile. That's what papas do." Before Ethan could answer, Rose climbed up too. She was still quieter than her sister, but she'd gotten her strength back. "We carved you a bird," she said shyly, holding out her small hand. And it was a rough wooden bird, clearly made by a child's hand. "So you have one too. So you belong with us." Ethan took the bird, his throat tight. He couldn't speak, just nodded and set it carefully on the windowsill with the others. For birds now, a family. That evening, after the girls finally fell asleep, Ethan knew it was time. He'd been carving something in secret for days, whenever Lena wasn't looking. His hands were clumsy with the work, still weak from the fever, but he'd finished it. A ring, made from a piece of tin he'd hammered flat and shaped carefully. It wasn't much. Wasn't gold or silver or anything valuable. But it was honest, and it was his. He found Lena sitting by the fire, mending one of his shirts. "Lena," he said, and she looked up. He sat down beside her, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been even facing Jed's guns. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I need to say something." She set down the mending, giving him her full attention. "6 years ago, I came up here to die," Ethan said slowly. "Not all at once, but piece by piece, day by day. I was so scared of being hurt again that I stopped living. Then you knocked on my door, and everything changed. You brought life back into this place. Into me." He pulled out the tin ring, held it in his palm. "This ain't much, and I ain't much. Just a man in a mountain who's been alone too long. But if you'll have me, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you and those girls. I'll protect you, provide for you, and love you the best way I know how." Lena's tears were falling freely now. "Ethan Carter," she whispered, "you saved my daughter's life. You fought for us when nobody else would. You gave us a home when we had nothing. You're already worthy. You've always been worthy. Is that a yes?" Ethan asked, hope and fear mixing in his chest. "Yes," Lena said, her voice strong and sure. 1,000 times yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then, for the first time, he kissed her. Gentle and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. Behind them, they heard a giggle. Ava and Rose were peeking out from their blankets, watching. "Mama's getting married," Ava announced gleefully. "Does that mean Mr. Ethan is our papa now?" Rose asked. Lena looked at Ethan, the question in her eyes. He nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your papa now, if that's okay with you." Both girls shrieked with joy and ran over, throwing themselves at Ethan and Lena. They all ended up in a pile on the floor, laughing and crying and holding each other. A family, strange and unexpected, but real. Spring came to the mountains 6 months later. The snow melted, revealing green underneath. Ethan expanded the cabin, building a second room for the girls. Lena planted a garden, teaching the twins how to grow vegetables. They made occasional trips to Pine Hollow for supplies, walking through town as a family now. People stared and whispered, but nobody challenged them. Jed had left the territory, and the law had decided a married woman with a husband's protection was nobody's business but her own. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Ethan stood on the porch watching his family. Lena was hanging laundry, humming a song. Ava and Rose were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. 4 wooden birds sat on the windowsill inside, catching the last light of day. A knock came at the door. Ethan tensed for just a moment, old instincts rising. But when he opened it, he found a young woman, thin and desperate, holding a sick baby. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I heard there's a man up here who helps people. My baby's burning with fever. I didn't know where else to go." Ethan looked back at Lena. She nodded, already moving to prepare medicine. He stepped aside, opening the door wide. "Come in," he said gently. "You're safe here." As the woman entered, Ava looked up from her playing. "Are we going to help them, Papa?" "Yes, sweetheart," Ethan said. "We're going to help them." Because that's what they did now. They helped people who had nowhere else to turn. The cabin that had once been a tomb for a dying man had become a sanctuary for the lost and desperate. And the man who had spent 6 years hiding from life had finally learned that love wasn't something to fear. It was something worth fighting for, worth living for, worth opening your door for, even when you don't know who's knocking. The mountain wind blew soft and warm that night. Inside the cabin, 2 families shared a meal and stories and hope. And somewhere in the darkness, the mountains kept their secrets, holding this story close like all the others that came before. A story of redemption, of second chances, of finding home in the most unexpected places. The wooden birds on the windowsill seemed to glow in the firelight, for witnesses to the miracle that had happened here. A miracle that started with a desperate knock and 3 words that changed everything. "She's not dead yet."